Okay, so on this section, you don't have to write the name of the objective. I just put it up there. So we have factoring trinomials, which we just did, but now this one we're taking out common factors first before we factor them into the two parentheses. Okay. And then factoring difference of squares. So some of them will be binomials, some of them will be trinomials, and then some of them will actually be polynomials. So 4 terms that we're going to be working with. So the first part, you'll probably, I think I'm only doing 2 of those. You should be good to go. The last 3 that I'm going to do with you is probably new, I'm thinking, for you guys.
You want to write it?
Yeah. So perfect square binomials, anytime you have, and we'll have some that you'll actually break down into 2 parentheses, and then you'll be able to break it down into a 3rd parentheses. So this is important. It's not just with 2 terms. It could happen with 3 terms in polynomials. So perfect square binomials, the first term must be a perfect square, so like x squared or x to the 4th. Okay, you don't want x to the 3rd. The second term must be a perfect square, so perfect squares meaning like 4 and 9, 25. And then the sign in the middle has to be a negative. If it's not, it won't work. You might be able to factor it and take out a common factor, but you won't be able to factor it into the 2 parentheses. So all 3 things must be true, not just 1 or 2 of them. Good. Good? Okay. They look like they're still ready. Okay. So number 56. So we have 5x to the 3rd minus 5x to the 2nd minus 30x. Okay, so we're written in descending order, so it's written in the right order. Okay, the difference from the last section we took and this one is we just went right into factoring and breaking things apart. Okay, so we're still going to remember the rules about the negative and what our signs are going to be, but we won't do anything about it until we take out the common factor to see what's left, and then we'll factor. Okay, so on number 56, what is our common factor that we are taking out?
5
and an x. So it has to be able to come out of all 3, not just 1 or 2 of them. Okay, it has to be able to come out of all of them. So we're going to take out a 5 and an x. This is part of the factoring. It doesn't go away, so make sure you write it when you write your answer. Okay. Now we're gonna write what's left to see if we can factor it further. Okay, so 5, we took out a 5, so it's dividing. So 5 divided by 5 would be 1. You can write the 1 if you want to, you don't have to, because there's still a variable there, and we know when variables are by themselves, there's 1 in front. Okay. Variables now with the exponents we subtract. So I started with 3 and I took 1 out, so there's still 2 left. Okay, now we go to the next one. So it's a negative 5 divided by 5, which would be a negative 1. Again, you can write a 1 if you want to, you don't have to. How many x's are left? Just 1. Okay, and again, you can write a 1 as an exponent if you want to, you don't have to. A negative 30 divided by a positive 5 would be a negative 6, so that's when we have to write the number. Are there any variables left? No. Okay, because we started with 1, took out 1, so there's none left. Okay, so now we're looking at this to factor, which is what we just took the test on. Okay, so we remember that when it's a negative, the signs are going to be different. So one's a plus, one's a minus. Doesn't matter which one we write first. It just really matters where the numbers are going to be at. Okay, this one we can read backwards because there's not a coefficient in front of the x to the second. So factors of 6 that subtract to give me 1. 3 and 2. Okay, so 3 and 2 are my two factors. So remember there was a rule that we put the larger number behind the sign of your second term, and your second term is a negative. So that means the 3 has to go behind the negative, and the 2 goes over there. Okay? And then we just split up our x's. And again, it doesn't matter if we have the x minus 3 first or the x plus 2 second. Okay. Okay, so the only thing, it's not on these first two that I do with you, but the other ones that we're doing with. Now we're looking at when we have those two parentheses that we broke down, if any of them are perfect square binomials, because those are binomials where there's just two terms. Okay, so if, like, say that second one was an x squared minus 9, then that means we can factor that one down further and we'd have 3 sets of parentheses. Okay, so just, it's not on this one because there's no perfect squares. Okay. Number, make sure that's correct. Yeah. Okay, number 66. So a negative 30 x squared minus 4x plus 16. Okay, so we are taking out a common factor just like we did, but because this one starts with a negative, we want to take the negative out with the common factor, okay, so that we can start it with a positive x squared instead of a negative, okay? What is the largest number we can divide out? 2. Okay, so we're taking out a negative 2. We can't take out any variables because this one doesn't have a variable in it, okay? So we're just going to write what's left. So a negative divided by a negative is going to change it to a positive 15x squared. And then again, a negative divided by a negative is a positive 2x. Okay, and then 16 divided by a negative 2 is going to make that a negative 8. Okay, so just be careful, you'll switch the signs of everything that's there before the right what's left. Okay, so again, the rules on the signs still work. What are my signs going to be? Different. So one's plus, one's a minus. But this time, we have to factor in the 15. We can't do the read backwards and say, what are my factors of 8 and subtract to give me 2, because the 15 is there. Okay? So factors of 15, 1 and 15, 3 and 5. I'm going to start with 3 and 5. Factors of 8, 1 and 8, and 2 and 4. Okay, so I'm going to start with 2 and 4 to check. Okay, so if I check my 2 outside ones, that would give me a negative 12. And that gives me a positive 10, which would give me a negative 2, and we need a positive 2. So how do I fix that? Just switch the signs. We don't need to move the numbers or anything like that. Okay, so now I'm just going to put my x's in. Okay, so negative 2 is on the outside, then you should have 3x minus 2, and then a 5x plus 4. Okay, and then again, there's no perfect square. Fine. We're good? Okay. And then somewhere in here, because I don't want to go to this one yet, there was supposed to be a binomial one, and I have a feeling I put it down. I did. Okay, so add this as your third one. Okay, so on your calculators, this is a binomial. So in order to factor a binomial, the first term has to be a perfect square, the second term has to be a perfect square, and the sign in the middle has to be a negative. So if all three things are true, you can factor them, okay? And 256 is a perfect square, 81 is a perfect square, and then we can split 4 evenly, 2 and 2, okay? So when we do this, we write 2 parentheses, and it's just like when we have trinomials, when it ends in a negative, the signs are going to be different, okay? So we're going to put a plus and a minus. On your calculators, if you don't have all your square roots memorized, you've got the square root key, okay? So 256 square root of that would be 16. Okay, so we're putting the square of that in the first position. So 16 will go here, 16 will go here, and then we split our variables evenly. So c to the second, c to the second. Okay, now we just do the same thing with our second term and put it in the second position. Taking the square root of 81 would be 9, and then we split our d just like we did with the c. Okay, so remember, binomials. This is a perfect square, this is a perfect square, but the sign in the middle is a negative. So obviously we wouldn't be able to go any further with that. But this one is, okay? So this comes down, this is still part of my factoring. Okay, but now this one I can break into 2 more parentheses. Signs are gonna be what? Different, so one's a plus, one's a minus. The square root of 16. 4. Okay, and we split our c's up. Okay, we had 2 now, so we split up c and c. Okay, the square root of 9. 3. And then split up our d's. This.
So why did you split up the second one?
Because it can still be, so factoring means you're breaking it all the way down if you can, okay? So in order to factor a binomial, you have to have perfect square, and sign in the middle is a negative. So just due to the fact that you had all 3 of those things, you could still go further. If it wasn't, say, like you had a 16c squared minus 3d squared, you're done, because 3 is not a perfect square. Yeah.
Couldn't you like break up the first one into like both negatives into parentheses?
Okay, so I have one smaller term. Yeah, you would get a third, you would get a middle term. So, because you'd have a negative, and say like you had a negative 2c and another negative 2c, because the signs would be the same, and you'd get a middle term in the middle. Here, when we distribute it, I get a negative 12 and a positive 12, which gets rid of the middle term, so it gets back to binomials. So it'd have to be different. That's where that negative comes from. Good question. Okay. Good? Okay, so breaking away from that, now we're going to the polynomials. Which is this. So 4m to the second plus 16m plus 16 minus n to the second. Okay, so I'm thinking in algebra, you learned how to factor these by putting parentheses around the first 2 and parentheses around the second 2, and then treat them like binomials, okay? That doesn't work on this particular one. This is why I'm saying this is probably new for you, okay? This is more algebra 2 stuff. We will practice that in a later section, but this one we do a little bit different, okay? Because you would have to have a perfect square, and the sign in the middle would have to be a negative, and we don't have that if we put parentheses around those first 2, okay? So we have to factor it differently. So that's why I underlined, we're going to treat this as a trinomial, even though this is still here, we're still going to bring it into the problem, but we're going to treat it like a trinomial and factor it first. Okay, so pretend like that minus n to the second is not there, okay? We're just looking at this part right here, okay? So I'm going to factor it. So the signs are what? When I go do my 2 parentheses, it's the same, and they're both going to be positive. Okay, so we're going to write our 2 parentheses. Signs are the same, they're both going to be positive. Most of these, they make it pretty easy for you. I mean, they could swap it up, but I looked at a bunch of them and they kind of did this. they made your first term and your third term perfect squares. Okay, and they happen when you break them up at equal that middle term. Okay, so if I do the square instead of 1 and 4, so I'm saying instead of putting 1 here, 4 here, the square of 4 would be 2. So we're going to try it. Okay, split it up. And the square of 16, I could do 1 and 16 and 2 and 8, but I could also do 4 and 4, right? And the pattern that I've noticed on all of these, they've been doing squares. So if I were to check this and go this times this, that would give me 8. This would give me 8. Well, 8 plus 8 is 16. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and put our m's in there. Okay? And then we're bringing this down as part of our answer. So minus x. Okay. So to know if you're doing these right, these two right here should be the same. If they're not, go back and check your signs, okay? To see if you did something wrong or split your signs or did the wrong numbers that are in here, okay? So because they're the same, I can write them like this. Remember when we were checking our answers, I said you can write them separate, or you can write them once with a what as an exponent? 2. Okay? Let's get this up. Right? Because this means the same thing. Okay, by doing this, we just made this into a binomial that we can factor down. Okay, so the first one's a perfect square because it's 2 of the same thing, right? And the last one's a perfect square, and the sign in the middle is a negative. But we just write it a little bit different. Okay, but what we just created was a perfect square binomial. Okay, and this is why I'm saying you probably have never seen this. And I'm going to do 3 of these too. It's the same pattern as making straight. Okay, so we're going to write this twice, but what we're going to do is we're going to add it onto the end. So we're going to have 2 parentheses. Just make your parentheses a little bit bigger than normal. Okay, so we're going to write this twice in here, just like it is. Okay, so we're going to write 2m plus 4. It's there twice. Okay, but if you look back at the binomial that we just did, when it's a negative, what are the signs going to be here? Different. So one's going to be a plus, one's going to be a minus, and then the square of n would be n. So really all you're doing is you're going to write this twice, okay, and then whatever this is, you're going to write it once with a plus and once with a minus. Okay, so we're using the perfect square binomial for a polynomial, okay, but we have to get it to the binomial part where we can factor it. Okay, so that one might not have made sense, but we're going to practice again, and then you'll look at these and you'll be able to skip some process.
Is that the answer?
That was your answer. So that's as far as you can factor it, because if we look back here, there's no other, like we can't split it because it's not squared, okay? So this is the factoring of this all the way back. We just kept on breaking it down until we can't break it down any further. There's no binomials. Trinomial has to have more than just one term. Okay, so we're going to try it again. So number 64. So 16b squared plus 16b plus 4. So just like the last one, you've got a perfect square in the first one, perfect square in the third one. So let's check it. Okay, so my signs are going to be same. They're both going to be plus. We're going to try the square root of 16. So I'm going to put 4b and 4b. Square of 4. 2. Okay, so if I were to check this, right, that gives me 8, that gives me 8, which gives me back to 16, just like the last one. Okay, so our rule was instead of writing this twice with 2 parentheses, I could write it once, right? With the 2 as a exponent, because this means the same thing as what I just wrote there. Okay, and then I bring this down. And I just created a perfect square binomial. So I write this one twice. I don't change any signs of it. It stays the same. Okay, but what am I putting at the end?
Plus or minus W.
Okay, plus W. And you just can't go any further because there's no exponents with the other variables. Not bad, right? Once you get to that point, see where it gets. Okay, I want you to try this one and then I'll, shit, maybe not. I thought there was one more. Actually, I'm gonna add one more on there so that you can try it. That was under 64. I want to. Did I do 57 with you? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, did I do? I don't have another one on here. That's maybe why. Okay, I lied. I thought I had another one on here.
Yeah,